All right. Hey, welcome, everybody. My name is Josh Klein. I am your host here at Free Thinking Ministries. And today, the question before us is, what in the world was that? We are going to dissect. A lot of people have seen this, the Jubilee video called Surrounded, of Jordan Peterson, surrounded by 20 atheists. He said 25, I think, once in the video. I think it was only 20. And we are going to dissect some specific parts of that. But before we get into that, we want you to like this video. Make sure you share, subscribe. We only have 70% of the people who watch our content are subscribed on YouTube. Please subscribe. It does us a wonder. We also are not monetizing this video, and I want to tell you why. We're not monetizing this video because Jubilee tends to strike places that do reviews and remove monetization anyway. So we're getting ahead of that. They were going to demonetize this video anyway. And we're going to show some clips from Jubilee. Last time I did this on this platform, I got booted from YouTube. So we are also on X right now and on Facebook. They probably won't boot us. YouTube might boot us. So all of that to say, you should subscribe, like us on Facebook. Go there, find Free Thinking Ministries on Facebook, like us, follow us there. Follow us as at Free Think Men on X, at Free Think Men. We are streaming right now on X as well. And YouTube, Free Thinking Ministries on YouTube, of course. Hit that like button, subscribe, share it with the world so that they can see why Jordan Peterson was not as bad as some people say he was, and why he's also not the greatest representative for Christianity. All right, Tim is here with me, Dr. Tim Stratton. We're going to be in your area of expertise a few times in this video, so that's part of the reason we wanted to do this.
Yeah, I was watching that video. I didn't get a chance to see it until this morning. I've been traveling a lot, as have you.
Yes.
Yeah, I watched it this morning. I saw some people talking about it on Facebook and Twitter here and there. Didn't have a chance to get deep into it. Saw a couple short highlights or lowlights, depending on your perspective. But yeah, I watched it this morning and I thought Jordan Peterson did pretty well. But I think it's important for us to realize that he is on a journey, and he's, I like watching this journey that he's been on over the last several years, and he's moving in the right direction. But we shouldn't hold him in the same at the same level as we do like William Lane Craig or J.P. Moreland or some of these other guys who would be great representatives of Christianity and a thing like that. Man, I wish I would have been there in that chair to answer some of those questions, and that's why we're doing this today. But he's not a philosopher. He does think philosophically. He's a careful thinker. But I don't think we should be propping him up to say, hey, here's a representative of Christianity. He is very friendly toward Christianity, and I think he's going in the right direction. And as I've written in this book, I think Jordan Peterson will be a Christian if he's not yet a Christian. But I think he's going in that direction. And for me, it's been fun to watch his journey. So I think people might be frustrated if they're like, he's a horrible representation of Christianity. Well, yeah, in a sense. But he's a great representation of a deep thinker who's been wrestling with God and is going to tell you how he sees things. So I don't know. What did you think, Josh?
Yeah, I tend to agree. Now, I think there's a little bit. That's the optimistic view. I think I shared with you before.
I am an optimist by nature, so
that's the optimistic view. Obviously, the pessimistic view would be, he's pretty much settled this stuff. He's psychologizing. He's a Jungian through and through, that sort of thing. I don't know that he settled it. I know, in fact, if he has settled it. And maybe that's why he doesn't like to talk about it in public right now, because he has said he doesnn't like to talk about it. Maybe it's because he hasn't settled it. But as we talk about that, I released a video just yesterday. It's actually in the description of this video, detailing where Jordan Peterson's theology is at right now. And that's through public appearances. I got a bunch of video clips of Jordan Peterson in that video. And I think like 10 quotes from his book, Right. Pull it out and just say, hey, this is where Jordan Peterson is theologically right now. Obviously, we want to pray for him that he would come to faith, that he would actually be able to affirm the literal death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and the literal Godhead, the Trinity, not a psychological form of the Godhead, that he would be able to do that. We want to do that. So check that out. If you haven't seen that video, it's about 38 minutes. You won't hurt my feelings if you do it on double speed. You can do it in about 16 minutes. You can watch that video on what Jordan Peterson actually believes. It's in the description, but only do that after you watch this live stream. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that when he was having a conversation with Alex O'Connor, he said something to the effect that he believed that there was a literal historical resurrection. Is that true?
Yeah. So if you go watch that video, Tim,
I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. I just got back from Indiana yesterday.
I'm not saying you should have watched it. I'm just saying if you do go watch it, I will talk about that. Yeah, I will talk about that. Yes, he says, because I think Alex O'Connor did a great job of stripping that down and saying, hey, if there was a video camera pointed at the tomb, would a man have walked out of the tomb? Mm-hmm. And then Jordan Peterson said, I suspect yes. Then he followed up with that but I don't know what that means, and neither did the people at the time. So it's kind of like,
I know what that means.
Yeah, but
I have a pretty good idea what it means anyway.
Right, but probably the lesser known one is when he's having a conversation with a guy named Jonathan Pageau, and this is in the video as well, where he says it's becoming increasingly more difficult to say that the resurrection didn't happen than to say that it did happen, or more ridiculous or something like that. You go watch the video. Go if people want to see the context of those things. So he has admitted to at least believing in some sort of resurrection, but he says he doesn't know what that means. I explain all of that in the video, but today we're going to talk about his appearance on Jubilee, and we've got a lot to get to. So if we are kicked off of YouTube, go to X, find us there. Go to Facebook, find us there, and we will keep on trucking. Anything else before we get into it?
I don't think so. Let's see what he has to say.
All right. So if you don't know what surrounded is, it is this, and I got to get this element figured out here. Let's do, not that one. Let's do this one. Okay. If you don't know what surrounded is, it is a program on Jubilee, which is a YouTube channel that they pick one prominent person, and then they have 20 people that oppose that view around them. That prominent person actually makes some statements, has some claims, and then people get to rush to the chair to debate this person. It's really actually a horrible format for a debate, but
I don't like it.
Yeah, but it gets views. Yeah, right. I mean, this video right now has see if I can see it, almost 5 million views. So it gets views. Yeah. All right. So let's get into it. We're going to skip the first section because the first section, frankly, I thought was kind of boring. And we're not going to do the whole video. But the first section was just not a great interaction. I thought this was an interesting interaction. So this guy, I think his name is Greg, comes in and says, hey, we've got two definitions of two different words here. You mean God in one sense. I, as an atheist, mean God in a different sense. And Jordan Peterson tries to, I think, direct this conversation towards what he means by God. And the claim here is that atheists reject God, but they don't actually understand what they're rejecting. That's what the claim is. Okay. So I've set the stage long enough. Let's see if Jubilee kicks us off. Here we go.
Hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
what literal way?
The way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that?
Or you want me to pause it there, or were you just moving your hand?
I'm just,
Just fiddling. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, I was going to get through
My
this a little
question?
bit.
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or
I
that
know
there are
that people-
multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting. It's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah. Like, like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God
Yeah.
that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
If your necklace
Okay, that's a good place to start because we have an ad. All right, anything you want to talk about with that? I got a few thoughts on it, but I want to kick it to you first.
Definition of God. There's many definitions that I think people have in mind. A lot of times, just the creator of the universe or the creator of all things. It could be that simple. The definition that I affirm and seek to defend is that God is a maximally great being. That has its roots in Anselm, who said something like the definition, or God by definition, is that in which nothing greater can be conceived. I like that. So in more colloquial terms, that just means a maximally great being. It's not subjective because there's these things, as Alvin Plantinga has pointed out, called great making properties. And just like as it's greater to know all things than to know some things, or to be able to do all things logically possible than only some things logically possible, or to love all beings as opposed to only some beings. You can, as a Spinal Tap would say, turn your amp up to 11, turn it up all the way without arbitrarily stopping short, and you're going to get a maximally great being. And if there's nothing incoherent about a maximally great being, then ultimately, as the ontological argument shows, then a maximally great being must exist. I think that's a sound argument. There's big debate about that because it's not very persuasive and it's confusing. But I've been studying it now for 15 years, and at first, when I first heard about it, I laughed at it. I'm like, there's no way that that's a sound argument. Well, I've been convinced that it is. But even if we didn't have that, I think the Bible still does point in that direction. I think Anselm was right that that in which nothing greater can be conceived, that's what we're going to call God. And that's my definition that I seek to defend. Many people try to show that that idea is incompatible with pain, evil, and suffering. And I've published a couple books dealing with that, showing that actually if God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, then we should expect pain, evil, and suffering. So anyway, that's the definition of God that I like to start with. I don't think Jordan Peterson is comfortable starting with that definition. That's where
we'll get into further in this clip. We'll get into he finally kind of hammers in on the definition, and I'll talk about why I don't really like it. But I did like what Greg, sitting across from Jordan Peterson, was doing here, where he was saying, look, you have this definition of God that I wasn't prepared. I don't know why he went to sit in the chair, but basically he was saying, I'm not prepared to debate your definition of God. I'm prepared to debate this other definition of God. And Jordan Peterson, that's what he's going to do basically this whole time. First, it was supposed to be one Christian versus 20 atheists, and then it became Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists. And so you do have to debate the definition, the person sitting across from you, not the idea that you want to debate. So he sat down and goes, well, this is the God that I don't think. And what Jordan Peterson is going to say is, well, I don't think you've actually thought to the furthest ends of what God could be and entail, right? Yeah. And so Jordan Peterson is going to say, this is what I think God is. But I get what Greg is trying to do. And then I like that Peterson kind of, excuse me, he kind of wraps it back to, well, do you believe there's like a theory of everything?
Yeah.
And then he says, well, what do you ground your idea of reality on? It's almost like the evolutionary argument against naturalism.
Right.
It's almost like that, right? Where he's starting to say, well, but how do you have reason? What grounds your reason? Right. That's kind of isn't that kind of what Peterson was saying there? I mean, he's looking for this unifying principle.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm biased. I think the free thinking arguments are going to get you a little deeper than the evolutionary argument against naturalism. But I stand on the shoulders of Plantinga on that, and I think make it even stronger, showing that we cannot, at least when it comes to metaphysical beliefs or metaphysical knowledge, if atheism is true, we shouldn't expect to be able to have metaphysical knowledge. Moreover, if one's going to affirm metaphysical naturalism and or a robust naturalism and affirm that we do not have libertarian freedom, then I would argue that you cannot possess metaphysical knowledge, which this whole debate is about. What can we know about metaphysics? Does God exist? Does free will exist? Is morality objective and transcend humanity? I mean, these are all metaphysical claims that people think they possess knowledge of. So anyway, we'll get into that more as we go along, I'm sure.
Yep. By the way, Nick Quint is here, and he says, Tim just wishing he was sitting there instead of Peterson. It's true.
Through my mind. Yes,
it's 100% true. He was wishing. Yeah. And then he also chimes in and says, could you argue that God is a maximally based being? I
want to know what he means by based.
Based? You don't get it? You know, when people call something based.
Oh, that's what the kids say.
Yeah, that's what the youngins say.
Yes.
Those youngins out there, they say based, of which Nick is part of the youngins.
Yeah. I've heard my son use that language. What's that mean?
There you go. All right, let's keep going. I have about a minute and 10 seconds, I think, left, or maybe a little bit longer of this particular exchange.
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine
right? I can infer.
From what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting it.
Yeah.
When he says I can infer, that's false. If robust naturalism and metaphysical determinism is true, which it seems like those, if robust naturalism is true, we would not possess libertarian freedom. If that's the case, he cannot infer. What happens to him is he experiences sensations of inferrings by mindless stuff that knows nothing about metaphysics and doesn't care if he does either. So he is not actively inferring anything regarding metaphysics. Something else, what Joshua Rasmussen, a great philosopher, has pointed out, is that it's mindless stuff is that is antecedent, these antecedent conditions that are sufficient to necessitate the entirety of his brain structure, brain chemistry, and mental actions, determines what he believes and what he experiences on regarding metaphysics. So we say that antecedent conditions, what are those? Mindless, if robust naturalism is true, it's mindless stuff that knows nothing about metaphysics and doesn't care if Greg does either, determines all of his mental actions regarding his thoughts and beliefs about these metaphysical ideas. So he is not inferring anything actively. He is passively experiencing sensations of inferrings. And those are two different things, right? He can be an active pilot who is piloting the ship of reason, but that means he's got libertarian free thinking, or he's a passive passenger who is merely along for the ride and just experiences sensations of these things that are ultimately caused and determined by mindless stuff that knows nothing about metaphysics and doesn't care if he does either. So Greg is not inferring anything if his worldview is true.
Yeah, and even if we said, okay, let's assume that these things can somehow coexist, that robust naturalism is true and you can infer. Even if we do that, I think Peterson's response is apt here. Okay, well then what principles are guiding your inferences?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where are you getting, like, all of a sudden you know this is true? How? Like, why do you know that that's true?
Well, and it would, okay, so if we're going to say that these two things are compatible, and guys like Kevin Tempe have tried to argue that, J.P. Moreland has responded to him in the literature, pushing back on that. But let's just suppose that those two concepts of libertarian free thinking are compatible with robust naturalism. I think those things, there's nothing strictly incoherent about that claim, or strictly impossible. But I think broadly speaking, I think it's metaphysically impossible for those two things to be true at once. With that said, though, let's suppose that that I'm wrong about that. I would say then it would be the laws of logic and the rules of reason, right? But so I would affirm, I would stand with the atheist there when he says, no, I can use reasoning. All right, well, that's going to raise some other questions, but that should be what we all start with. I mean, that's what the free thinking argument does. That's usually the way I write it out. It's the fourth premise, that human beings are rational agents who can infer truths about metaphysical reality, or something along those lines. I've written it many different ways, but that's where we should all start, because we experience that every day. And that's what we're trying to do in these debates, is get to metaphysical knowledge. So we start there. What can we agree on? We can agree that we're going to use reason to reach deductive conclusions or abductive conclusions about ultimate reality, metaphysics. Now where does Peterson go from there?
Well, let's see.
Okay.
Yeah, let's keep going.
At the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that
Okay.
reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my
Let
empathy.
me rewind it so that we can.
Right, I can infer. I can.
From what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that
Okay.
reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason, or my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and
and wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten. But then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah. Like,
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a difference.
Okay, let's stop it there. I got a few things to say on this. One is obviously they pivot, right? So they're pivoting, and now they get into this empathy. And I think Peterson does a good job of saying, well, what governs your empathy? Like, how do we know if one person's empathy is in the right direction? Another, if they're in conflict, we have to choose. It's interesting because Greg basically says it's a democratic process, right?
Yeah.
Where he says, well, then we get together and we have a conversation, and then whatever comes out of that conversation is just that's how we figure out what the right road is.
Yeah.
I don't think he understands the implications
Right.
of that.
Yeah. Majority vote decides morality.
Yeah, probably then the Civil War shouldn't have been fought or something like that.
Well,
right?
I mean, if majority vote plus power is going to determine morality, then if the Nazis would have won World War II and killed or brainwashed everybody who disagreed, then I guess the Holocaust would have been objectively good.
Yeah.
Or at least good. His worldview is going to fall apart very quickly.
Yes, yes. But then Jordan says, well, we're governed by conscience. Okay. But then he says an interesting thing where he says, Elijah in the Old Testament defined God as conscience, the voice of conscience from within, or something like that. I'm not.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think I remember that Bible verse where he says, "Let me define God."
yes, and I assume it's the still small voice experience, right?
Now, that's not a definition. That's just something that God does.
Yes, it's an experience.
Right.
So this is where Jordan Peterson's understanding of Scripture as archetypal gets in trouble with his hermeneutics.
Okay.
Right.
Mhm.
So like, if it's all archetypal, if it's all archetypes of being and becoming and what have you, then Elijah's experience becomes a definition in the narrative, because that's the point of the narrative, to point to the fact that, well, God is a still small voice. That means he's the conscience that guides you. He's Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio. That's a definition. It's by definition in the Old Testament. But I don't think that's what God's doing if we look at the hermeneutics in that passage. In that passage, what God is doing is saying, you are distraught. You think you're alone. I'm going to meet you with peace and remind you of who I really am. In the still small voice. I'm not always raining fire down on the altar to burn it up once it's been washed over by buckets of water. I'm not always going to do that. I am sometimes going to meet you in the quiet, and then remind you that I also have 5,000 that haven't bowed a knee to Baal. You're not on your own, right? So to me, I think, like, when he just assertively says, well, the Old Testament, Elijah defines God as the conscience from within. I go, well, no, Jordan, I don't think that's the case. Oh, what do you think?
Yeah, I just, like I said earlier, I don't see that as a definition.
Yeah.
Of God. I think I would say, if God is a maximally great being, and that in which nothing greater can be conceived, then we would expect God to be that still small voice.
Yes.
At times like that. So yeah, I just don't see that as a definition. I see that like, yeah, it's something God does, or an experience we have with God, something along those lines.
Yeah, it's sometimes how God reveals himself.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that's a definition.
Right.
But that archetypal, like, okay, this story is pointing towards, this is how we conceive of God. That's where you get in trouble with your hermeneutics, I think. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, Jordan Peterson is not a systematic theologian. He's not a philosopher. He is a deep thinker who is on a very big platform right now, and we all get to watch him wrestle with God. I am a Jordan Peterson fan, and I think he's doing really good things for the world and for culture. And I love the fact that he is getting closer and closer to truth in front of our eyes. And let's enjoy that. But let's not put him on a pedestal and say he's the systematic theologian or analytic philosopher that we all need to that we all need to base our lives on.
Yes.
Anything like that. So
yeah, that's why I said, and again, I reviewed his book. We keep talking about him wrestling with God, because he literally wrote a book called We Who Wrestle with God. Right. And I don't think you've read the book. You've probably been reading other things, but I did read the book. I wrote a review of the book on our website. You can find it at freethinkingministries.com. You can find it in the links in the description of this video as well. But at the end, and I'll give people the end of, this is not what a good author does. He doesn't usually just share the conclusion, but I'm going to share it because I'm feeling benevolent today. At the end, I say it's a good book. He's a deep thinker, but it's also a dangerous book, because if you see him as somebody that is offering up a systematic, even though he's not saying he is, I think that's important. Yeah. If you see that and you go, well, this must be what God is, you're going to be led down a really bad path. So as Christians, I think that clarity is good for us to be like, yeah, we're excited to see where this will take him. He may convert someday. Who thought INRC Ali would convert? Who thought, so people who say, well, Jordan Peterson will never come out and just say he's a Christian. He's closer than INRC Ali was.
Well, and look, there's a lot of debate about what the word Christian means. And I think most people that claim to be Christian, or at least many people who claim to be Christian, aren't really Christians the way we would define the term. Maybe they're Christian. I think that's what Jordan Peterson is scared of, actually. You know what? I think he believes in the existence of God, and if push comes to shove, he's going to believe in the resurrection. And I think he's trying to figure out what this objective law above the law is. And I think he's trying to live that way, but he's got a lot to work through still. But really, it comes down to this. When people say, "Are you a Christian?" and what does that mean? I said, well, I try to follow the teachings of Christ. Everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified, I call that the law of Christ. And I have devoted my life to following the law of Christ. That's what I mean by Christian, and try to follow the law of Christ and be consistent with that.
And of course, you're going to need to get the ontology of Jesus correct within that as well. Because Mormons would say, right, we're trying to follow the law of Christ. So this is
there. You have to have some ontologically correct beliefs.
Yes.
But this gets us into some deep waters. In fact, at the EPS coming up in November, our colleague Phil Kullberg and I will be presenting a paper in Boston on this issue, and we look at what makes things different gospels. And so we look at Mormonism, and we look at some of the things that Mormonism gets right, even though they get a whole bunch of ontological stuff wrong, but they get the nature, or I'm sorry, the character of Jesus right, that he does, and the fact that he desires all people to know the truth, and that he is truth, and that he's not going to deceive people willy-nilly. Mormons get that part right, where there's many Christians today who actually see God, and the view that they have of him logically entails that he's a deity of deception who causes and determines all of his followers and everybody else to affirm lies, and false theological beliefs. And so I would say, okay, well, they're getting God's ontology right, that he's a Trinity and things like that, but they're getting some big things wrong at the same time. So I'm kind of the stuff I've been studying lately is really kind of laser focused on what do we need to get right about God. We do have to get his ontological structure correct, like that he is a triune being who exists necessarily, the only necessary existing being, and everything else that exists is contingent. I think these things are vital to understand, and we better not be rejecting those things. Also, though, if you're going to say, yeah, but God is, or even imply tacitly that God is a deity of deception, I say, what's worse? Getting the Trinity wrong or God's character wrong?
Well, I think you kind of answer what's worse when you say, Mormons aren't Christians, but Calvinists or people who are theistic determinists, you'd probably still lump into the Christian camp.
Yeah, I do. What I've said elsewhere is that Calvinism is incompatible with true Christianity, but Calvinists are awesome Christians. They are true Christians. And I'm going to break that down in the paper, so stay tuned. Okay. And you might get mad when you hear me say that stuff, but I'm not doing this to try to start a fight. I'm doing this because I care about truth.
Yes, Tim never tries to start fights.
Don't.
He just happens
I'm willing to fight.
It just happens to break out. Okay, so and I would say to bring it back to this conversation, Jordan Peterson in many ways gets the character of Jesus correct, but he's not getting the ontology or the goal of Christianity correct, and that's the problem. Like later in this, I don't think we're going to cover it, but he says someone asked him to define Christian, and he says the person who picks up the cross and follows Jesus, even though the whole world's against them, or something like that. And then he says it's the person who carries the heaviest burden of self-sacrifice. That's a Christian. And I go,
yeah, that's
no,
that
it's
definition.
Yeah, no. And then he says, well, like he says later, well, I suppose some people would define it as if you believe that Jesus died and rose again, but those mean the same thing. And I go, no, those don't mean the same thing.
See, this is where he's not an analytic or systematic theologian, and so he's going to make some dumb mistakes like that. I mean, so the analytic theologian is so concerned about definitions and getting proper definitions and then building logical cases from there. And that's not Jordan's strength. So we just have to realize what he's good at and what he's bad at, and what is role, and just realize that he's not an analytic. I think he could be. He's got the gifts.
And some of the times he just asserts a definition. Well, God is conscience by definition. It's like, well, you can't just add by definition on the end of the phrase.
Yeah, what is the definition?
Like,
I think that comes along with God being that which nothing greater could be conceived. It would be, but he hasn't done that yet.
Okay. So let's move forward. We're going to go past Greg now, and we are going to go to, I don't remember this young man's name. I'm sorry. But this is a young man, and I wanted to touch on this because I don't think we're going to watch all 4 minutes of it, but this is an interesting exchange because this is a guy who used to be a Christian, now an atheist, and I want to understand, I want to hear a little bit of what he has to say, but I do want to talk about one thing that Brando brings up here. Is that Brando? Am I reading that right? It says, Jordan is also way more familiar with the Eastern Orthodox symbolism views than systematic theology views. That is 100% the case. That's one of the things that I argue in the video and in the review as well, because of Jonathan Pageau and the other people that are influential in his life. The three main influences theologically in Jordan Peterson's life are his wife, Tammy, converting to Catholicism. I think it's a huge, she had cancer. She was miraculously healed of the cancer. It's an awesome story. Again, I keep plugging my own stuff, but shameless plugs. Again, if you watch the video, you'll see a little bit of it, and I think that opened him up to more to seeing God more than just the Jungian psychological God. He said, "Well, there's something more corporeal about God here." And number two is Jonathan Pageau. He is an Eastern Orthodox thinker that is hugely influential in him. And then number three is C.G. Jung or Carl Jung. I think you add those three together, it's clear where Jordan Peterson's getting some of his theology. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But this young man is we'll let him define himself, and then we'll pause it partway through.
Mm-hmm. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something.
I forgot. This claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science. That's what this claim is. And I think it's a very good claim, by the way.
Yep, I agree.
It's a very good claim. So here you go.
They can even engage in observation. Okay. And that act of prioritization of attention is a value predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here.
That's a great, there's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it takes place.
Morality is one of them.
Yes.
That there is this, that we ought to follow the evidence wherever it goes, and we ought not fabricate evidence or mislead others when examining the evidence. Are there these objective laws or laws above the law that are true that we, in order to do science, we ought to adhere to?
Not only that, you have to believe that science can discover truth,
right?
Like that. You have to say, okay, the world is ordered in such a manner that we can discover the truth about it.
Yeah, which we would expect it to be if Christianity is true.
100%.
Psalm 19, 1 and 2 says, "Day after day, your creation pours forth speech. Night after night, it delivers knowledge." So that's a nice way of saying studying nature, which is what science does by definition. Studying nature will get you to truth, and you will gain knowledge, and it even points to God, right? We can. You look at things like the Kalam cosmological argument, the fine-tuning argument. These scientific-based these arguments where the premises are supported by scientific data point to the existence of God, and based on Scripture, if Christianity is true, we should expect to be able to study nature and get truth about reality. And I think science works much better if under the umbrella of Christianity, around the foundation of Christianity, than that on atheistic naturalism or robust determinism, robust naturalistic determinism. I think, as we mentioned earlier, it's really hard to infer. I don't even see how we can, how one can say, I have inferred that the best explanation of all the data is X instead of Y, when ultimately it's mindless stuff that knows nothing about science and doesn't care if you do either, which is determining your sensations of inferrings. So again, that gets us back to the free thinking arguments. But what were you going to say, Josh? I think I interrupted you.
No, I don't think you did.
Okay.
Let's keep going here. What this young man has to say.
Is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
That's people debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand.
There's the admission, right? People debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly. So I don't know what he holds in his personal life, but he generally doesn't discuss it publicly.
Yeah, and again, my suspicion is that he's seen too many people that label themselves as Christians that he would say, "That's not me." And so, what does it mean? I want to ask him, are you a Christ follower? Are you trying to live your life consistently with everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified? That's the question that's important to me. Because if you ask somebody from the early church in Acts, if you're a Christian, they might look at you and say, "Well, no, I'm following the way. I'm part of the way."
Yeah.
And so it really depends on what one means by Christian. I see so many people who label themselves as Christians who have not devoted their lives to everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified, and living consistently with that. That's what I mean by Christian. And so I'm going to give Jordan Peterson the benefit of the doubt here. Now, I would like him to say, "Hey, let me define what I mean by Christian. And if that's what you mean, then yes, call me a Christian. If that's not what you mean, then don't call me a Christian." It really depends what you mean by that. Now, again, that's what philosophers are trained to do and analytic theologians are trained to do. But again, that's not Jordan Peterson. He's a psychologist.
Yeah, it'd be super helpful if he did that. I do think he and I think if he's not come to a conclusion yet, then why would he even do that? But let's see what else this young man has to say. One thing I wanted to say as we move forward, I think so. This was supposed to be billed as like one Christian versus 20 atheists. They chose Jordan Peterson, and then this section here, and then one later that we'll get to shows that either Jubilee got something wrong or Jordan Peterson was disingenuous. Yeah. I think Jubilee probably got something a little bit wrong because Jordan Peterson said, "Sure, if you want to call me a Christian, whatever. I just want to debate the 20 atheists, but I want them to debate me on my terms, like what I believe, not what somebody else believes." And then it was initially called One Christian versus 20 Atheists, and then it changed to Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists in the video. So just to call that out as we move forward. All right, here he goes.
And me, myself, I am a former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think it should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says it's
that's
immoral.
why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God. And so slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on slavery.
And wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just Christianity?
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution of morality.
What do you mean by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture.
Okay, I want to stop it there. So, two things to say about that. One, it seems like this young man was convinced by the slavery argument. Well, slavery exists in the Bible. Why wouldn't God just say you shouldn't have slaves?
Mhm.
And then he goes, oh, my whole worldview is blown up. Maybe it's not the case. I don't know. But that's the first thing he brings up. And then his kind of worldview exploded. Second, sometimes
Hey, did you see this? Sorry.
I
to
did.
interrupt.
I did. I was.
Really
I'm gonna get to it in just a second.
Okay. All right. I'll sorry to interrupt.
Sorry. So
Hi,
I
Greg.
saw. That's why I paused for a second. So sometimes people go straight from fundamentalism, and then they just discard everything because all of a sudden, well, evolution might be true, or this slavery, this and that, and all of a sudden they discard all of that and go straight to atheism. And it seems to me like that might be the case. But let's take a pause for a second because we have. Okay, go ahead. And then
I just want to add to that. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Utah. In fact, I'm going to be in Utah here in a few days and talking with Mormons. I love to show Mormons why Mormonism is false, why Joseph Smith was wrong or lying, or just that Mormonism in general is false. But what happens a lot in Utah is when a Mormon comes to see that Mormonism is false, they just go straight to atheism. I'm like, whoa, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I see a lot of young earth creationists do that too. I used to be a young earth creationist. And I am no longer a young earth creationist. In fact, I'm very open to God creating through evolution, what some people might refer to as theistic evolution. I refer to it as the intelligent design of theistic evolution, and that it only looks random from our perspective, but it is intelligently designed from a divine perspective. That's a whole other conversation. But hey, I have written about that in this book in the last chapter. Got the second edition coming out soon. Anyway, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Young earth creationism can be false, and Christian theism can still be true. Evolutionary theory can still be true, and so can Christianity. So, also on the slavery point, I mean, so much has been written on this. I pointed out in my written work that the Bible is clear in the very first book in Genesis that it is objectively evil to use the word. And that's what Genesis calls it, evil, referring to somebody being sold into slavery against their will, right? Genesis 50:20. What you meant for evil, God used for good. What was evil? Joseph being sold into slavery against his will. So from the very first book, we see that kind of slavery is objectively evil. As Jordan Peterson discussed too, this is also highlighted in Exodus. Now, we still have slavery today. It's called credit cards. But back then, before credit cards came out, there was indentured slavery, not to be confused with the kind of slavery that America had a couple hundred years ago.
It's not chattel slavery.
Not chattel, different kinds of things. So when you say, what do you mean by, you got to say, what do you mean by slavery? And so look, basically, Scripture is saying, hey, if you're going to have somebody enslaved to a credit card, make sure you don't violate these rules. But it's still telling people how to, if somebody is going to be like, okay, I'm in huge debt to you, I'm going to work for you as your slave for the next 7 years. The Bible says, hey, this is how you ought to treat them. But that can be an entire topic for another YouTube conversation. But I tell people to start with Paul Copan's work, and we'll go from there.
And I mean, Tom Holland's written about this in Atheist as well. And Jordan Peterson is objectively right here that, and this other young man is trying to explain that, well, no, it's just human beings just happen to evolve, and that's what did away with slavery. That just doesn't follow, because slavery was around for thousands of years, and only the Christian West sought to end it. That is the only, even now, if you go throughout the world, it's really only in the Christian West that slavery is not practiced. It's illegal. So Tom Holland's written about that. But We do have somebody that was on Jubilee in the chats right now, Greg from the first clip. So I do want to, I don't know how much we'll engage with what he has posted in the comments here, but Greg, if you ever want to come on to the program and have a conversation, we'd love to have you. Just go to freethinkingministries.com and hit the contact us button on freethinkingministries.com, and you'll get connected. We would love to have a discussion with you. Both of the times we've seen you in Jubilee, you've been very articulate, very well spoken, and I think would be a fun person to have a conversation with. So all of that to say, Greg kind of chimed in here. He says, "Hi, I'm Greg in the first clip. Interesting analysis. In interviews, Jordan has implied that these essentially secular definitions of God mean that atheists are unaware theists." And I could see how Jordan would say that. Moving on, says, "I was attempting to engage with that implicit argument. That's why I outlined the different concepts of God Peterson appeals to in my opening statement." And then moving on to the next one. And this is where YouTube having the character limit makes it difficult. "That was me engaging with and dismissing his prompt's characterization of me as not knowing what I'm rejecting." And then I think this is the last one. He says, "From there, I honestly didn't understand and was frustrated by the way the conversation progressed. It felt like he was yanking me around to other topics. Maybe he wasn't, but it felt like he was."
Yeah, I can see how we would feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for chiming in, for watching, Greg. Thank you for chiming in. We are theists. We are Christian theists, so we would be interlocutors with you if we had the conversation. So I could definitely see how it would feel that way, especially when it feels so disconnected when he says, "Well, do you think there's just a theory of everything?" It's like, well, I want to talk about these definitions first.
Yeah.
I do think he was trying to get you to his definition. So, hey, thank you for engaging in the comments, and that is an open invitation. So you can just visit our website. We'd love to get connected with you. All right, should we continue?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I actually want to move on to a different section. This was a really good exchange with this gentleman here. This is still the you can't morality and purpose can't be found within science. Is still this. This is a really good exchange here. Jordan Peterson says something here again about the definition of God that I want to listen to briefly. So I hope I have it on the right path here.
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, because I would say, by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a definition, right?
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Okay, so...
Oh, yeah.
Yes, go for it.
If Christianity is true, the objective purpose of life is love. God created humanity on purpose and for the specific purpose to love each member of the Trinity and each person of the Trinity and each person the Trinity's ever created. Jesus makes that clear when given the two greatest commands: love God first with every fiber of your existence, is how I like to say it, and then everybody love everybody, and even goes so far to make it clear that we're supposed to love those who see us as enemies. So the objective purpose of life is love. Paul reiterates that point. I think it's in Galatians 5:14, where he says the entire law can be summed up in one thing, and that's love. So yeah, if Christianity is true, we were created on purpose and for the specific purpose to align our lives with ultimate reality, and that's the triune love relationship of God that is eternal in the past and without beginning, and is more fundamental to ultimate reality than the universe itself. So if Christianity is not true, then love is not more fundamental to reality than anything, including the universe. But if Christianity is true and the Trinity is true, then love is fundamental to ultimate reality, exists eternally in the past without beginning. The universe begins to exist, so do people. So love is there as the foundation. So God created, purpose of life is love. God created humanity on purpose and for the specific purpose of love. And then God gives us the freedom to either align with or to hit that target or to miss it altogether. And that's what sin means, is to miss the mark. And for eternity, he can't force love upon you. So he gives you the freedom to choose to miss the mark or not. And those who freely choose to miss the mark into the infinite future are free to live apart from everybody who has chosen to love everybody. And that's what we call hell. So that's a little more than the purpose of life, but there you go. Purpose of life is love.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I think it is good, and I'd agree with that. Jordan Peterson said something interesting here. He said, by definition, God is the unity on which all moral claims are based. And then again, he says, by definition, he makes that claim. I think this is better. I think this is actually better than the conscience claim.
It's a true claim, but it's not the definition, right? So God is the foundation of objective morality. But it's not, that's one part of it. That's just not full definition. You're right.
Yeah. Yes.
So again, I go back to, if God is a being in which nothing greater can be conceived, then it will also be true that God is the foundation of objective morality.
Yeah.
And that's it's based upon his loving triune nature that exists necessarily without beginning.
Yeah. I'd love to hear Jordan Peterson discuss the Trinity. I don't think I ever have. But I don't know if he has a Jungian perspective of the Trinity that's a psychological idea, or if he has a more Eastern Orthodox understanding of the Trinity or not. I've never heard him talk about it. Maybe he wouldn't want to talk about it. But I'd also say it's a little bit better. But what Jordan Peterson does, even in his book, is he tends to say, hey, in this section, the definition of God is this in the Bible. In this section, the definition of God. And what I think he's kind of saying is God reveals himself as this here. God reveals himself as this here. But then what he fails to do is takes all that revealing and bringing it together into one cohesive definition of who God is. And I think part of the reason for that is, he'll say this later in this video, I don't know if you caught it when you watched it, Tim. He says, well, God is unknowable. He's ineffable, right? He's not knowable. And so, yeah. So I think what he's saying is, and that's the constraint for us as human beings, is that we are called to know the eternal. We are finite beings called to know an infinite being. Well, that's very complex and difficult, right? As a finite being to know the infinite being. So there's all these little different definitions of God that get filtered down to us, and then we've got to piece them together to understand who God really is kind of what he's saying. And what we would say is, well, yes, that's why the infinite revealed himself to the finite, similar to how, and he'll bring up Moses, similar to how he revealed only the back of himself to Moses.
Right.
He reveals enough of himself for us to make a decision, a free will based decision on whether or not we truly believe that God exists. Because I don't remember who said it, but it isn't clear to me that if God revealed all of himself to a human being who didn't know who he was, if the human being could survive that, right? Like, it seems to be the case that what he says to Moses is, that's not going to happen. Like, if I reveal all of myself to you, you can't handle it. And it's not the Jack Nicklaus version of you can't handle the truth. It's literally a finite being can't handle the infinitude of God. So it's interesting because I think like that's the part of Jordan Peterson where I'm like, hey, right on, but also,
right. Says so many things where he's getting so close to the truth, and again, it brings joy to my heart to watch him moving in the right direction. But yeah, again, let me reiterate, his journey's not over. He's got a long way to go. So do I, by the way. But yeah, I'm enjoying the ride. I enjoy watching him, that he has this huge platform and he's living this out under the spotlight. But yeah, he's going in the right direction. He's not there yet.
And this is why having him kind of represent Christianity in the middle is just like, that's not a good look, Jubilee. Like you even if he agreed to it as, I'll be some sort of Christian, it's incumbent on Jubilee. And I know for a fact, I'll share this right now. I know for a fact that somebody that you and I know that knows the producers on Jubilee told them they need to get a a Christian philosopher, an actual Christian philosopher. He mentioned multiple people. Sean McDowell was one of them. William Lane Craig was another one. He said these people would do it if you asked.
Yeah.
So I know Jubilee could have, but they chose to go with the big ticket item rather than representing Christianity fully.
bad.
So, yeah.
Come on, Jubilee.
And this is why we would totally get demonetized if we had monetized this video, because we're ragging on Jubilee and they'll be like, no, none of that. None of that. I'm surprised we're not kicked off of YouTube yet. That's we're still going strong on YouTube. All right. Do we want to keep moving forward? Do you have anything to add?
No, let's go.
All right. We're going to go to somebody that you know next. We're going to go to Danny. Is that his name?
Yeah. Yeah. I consider, look, I consider Danny to be a good friend. In fact, I trust him. He was, he's been on my show. He's been on this show. I've been on his show, and that's not Danny.
No. He's next.
Oh, okay.
He's after her.
Okay.
He's the next person. I thought she did good, by the way.
Yeah,
and
she did great.
I don't know if we're maybe if we have a little bit of time, let's do the conversation that those two had back and forth at the very end.
Yeah, what was her
really
name?
cool.
I can't remember her name.
I can't remember it either. Let me see if I can. Oh,
I loved the just the relationship that they developed quickly, and were able to have a non-aggressive kind of a conversation. I could have listened to those two talk for a long time. That didn't happen with Danny. Danny and Jordan Peterson clashed.
I think her name was Xena, by the way.
Xena, okay.
Zina or Xena. I don't know. I'm just reading it on the thing.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, again, with Danny, he's been on the show. I consider him to be a friend. He and I have had several phone calls together, just even saying, "Hey, what's up? How are you doing?" I've told him things that I'm struggling with. He's told me things that he's struggling with, and while he doesn't say he prays for me, and I tell him that I pray for him, we have a friendship, and he's never been mean to me, or he's never. It's just I was surprised to see how it went down on Jubilee with Danny, because I like him so much. And ironically, it was Danny who reached out to me after my first debate ever with Dr. James White. And Danny made it clear. He's like, "Hey, everybody watching, you have to distinguish between substance and style here." And he said the substance of Tim's, of my arguments, were good, and they were ignored by James White, even though he had better style because he's such a veteran, and this was my rookie debate, and I didn't have good style. And I learned a lot from that in my next debates. In fact, I really was happy with my debate with Dr. Alex Malpass. It wasn't contentious. In fact, we were both complimenting each other, but we were still going after each other's views while being very cool about it, I guess. And it didn't happen with Danny and Jordan. And I'm not sure why. It might have been some pressure that, hey, we don't have a lot of time to get through this. He had some things he wanted to get to. But and let me stick up for Danny a little more here. I thought the substance of Danny's objections were really good, and his style didn't come off well. But I think Danny brought up some really good points that Jordan Peterson, I want to hear him answer these things, right? But Jordan was just like, "Hey, if you're going to talk to me like that, I'm not going to talk to you at all." And I'll just say that Danny's substance was great, but he didn't come off well. Hey, I've been there. Danny knows that and has talked to me about it, so I can relate. But I'd love to see Danny and Jordan Peterson have a conversation where they had an hour. The pressure wasn't there. You're not going to get voted off. Yeah. I just think Danny would have handled things differently.
This
got off the wrong foot, and it was just bad.
This entire format is built specifically for viral moments. That's the entire format is. It's not actually conducive to an actual conversation. I will say this. this is about halfway through the video, I think, halfway through the time. And from what I understand is sometimes they move stuff around, so it might not actually be halfway through the recording. Sometimes they move the prompts around. But it seemed to me that Danny was just agitated that he wasn't debating a Christian.
Right.
Like at the very beginning, like he's like, okay, I'm tired of this. Jordan Peterson has beat around the bush so much, and so I'm just going to go after him because I'm sick of this. That's kind of the tenor I got, was like, if I don't get to debate a real Christian, then I'm going to go after this guy, which again, I wouldn't like that much. And obviously Jordan Peterson didn't like it, but let's watch it now. We've talked a lot about it. Let's watch it. And then you can stop me if you want to, whenever you want.
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I can flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary is
below.
quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to. Do
prioritize, and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
what do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand?
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
How do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christian versus atheist?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk to
not.
you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something. You are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. I mean, what I think Danny meant was when he says you're nothing, meaning he's not being clear about if he's a Christian or not. And so he can't put him under some label. But man,
You're like, he's saying you're like trying to nail Jello against the wall. You won't give me a target date.
right. I think that's what he was meaning. It didn't come off well for Danny. But guys, I'm just telling you, Danny is a deep thinker. And he didn't come off well there.
I want to defend him a little bit too, because I don't remember. Now, it might have been when he introduced the topic before the Xena came up and talked, but I don't remember Jordan Peterson actually introducing the subject of hierarchy until after, in the conversation with Danny, until after Danny brought up Mary.
Right. That's how I remember it also.
Yeah. And I could be wrong. Go back and look. I could be wrong. But like, I think they're both onto something there. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think Danny is saying, hey, well, if that's your only definition of worship, then yeah, Catholics worship Mary, which is kind of a trap to put you in, because now you're telling him your wife and your daughter worship Mary as God, and Peterson doesn't want that to be the case, right? So I think it's kind of the avenue he's going at.
Right. And I think that's going to really depend on the Catholic that you talk to also. I know way too many Catholics that would say, and have told me, no, we do not worship Mary. We have her in a they'd hold her up on that hierarchy. She'd be high on the list, but they're not worshiping her in the same way that, I did not like Barack Obama as our president, but if I were in his, if I had a chance to meet him, I'm going to be, because of his position, I recognize that level of authority. It definitely doesn't mean I worship him.
So is this you admitting that you worship Donald Trump?
No, I don't worship. Jesus is my savior. Trump is my president. No. Okay. So, what did Jordan say? Attend to, prioritize, and what?
Sacrifice for.
Sacrifice for. those
Yeah.
are things that you do when you worship. But again, I don't think this is a sufficient list. So here's how when people ask me, what does it mean to worship God? I say it's the greatest command. To bring it back to the objective purpose of life, you were created on purpose and for the specific purpose to have a true love and eternal love relationship with your creator. And so when I worship God, it's because I love him more than anything else in life. I only want one thing in life, and that's when my life comes to an end and I close my eyes for the last time on this side of death, and I open my eyes on the other side of death. I want to be looking into the eyes of Jesus, and anything other than that to me is hell, because I love him more than anything. And so I don't always show it with my actions, but at the end of the day, that is what drives me. I'm in love with Jesus. I'm in love with God, and I seek to love him more. And look, when Paul says the entire law is summed up in the law of love, that's worship. And when we love things more than God, that's what an idol is.
Mm-hmm.
So for the Catholics, and I know some Catholics who it seems to me that they love Mary more than God. Well, I'm going to say they're the ones that they're worshiping an idol there. And they don't have it right. They're wrong. And I would say their salvation, at least some red flags are raised, right? I'm not the ultimate judge, but I also know many Catholics who will condemn their fellow Catholic who is worshiping Mary and loving Mary more than Jesus. And the Catholics that I spend most of my time with, who are philosophically inclined, and take their theology very seriously, don't make those mistakes. So, yeah, let me give it back to you. Do you have any follow-up questions for me?
Not really. I think it's kind of an unfortunate exchange, because I thought they might get somewhere, and then it was kind of like, well, you're Catholic, aren't you, basically? And he was like, well, I don't have to tell you what I believe. And I thought that was kind of cheap by Jordan Peterson to say that. But I think he had this innate ability, and maybe it's because of all of his clinical practice in psychology. When he's sitting across from someone, he has kind of an ability to say, this person just wants to win.
Right.
I'm going to give them the satisfaction of winning.
Uh-huh.
And you can see that because his disposition changed when people looked like they wanted genuine dialogue rather than just winning the debate. Yeah. That's why he picked Xena for the end.
Uh-huh.
She didn't want to win. She just had the back and forth. And I think that's what he found in Danny. Oh, you're just trying to find a cheap shot to win points. I want to actually just have a conversation. But the weird thing about that is that venue, the way it's organized, it's all about winning. Right. Right. It's all about kind of those cheap shots too. Yeah. So I don't know. It wasn't my favorite interaction. I don't know Danny at all. I know he didn't back away from this. I saw a video that he uploaded recently saying that he doesn't regret anything that he said or did, because he's sick and tired of Jordan Peterson not declaring fealty for one thing or the other. One thing I'll say about go ahead.
Well, one thing that Danny said is either you're a Christian or you're not. And again, that depends upon how one defines Christian. So I agree in one sense. I also disagree in another sense, because, Mormons refer to themselves as Christians, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of, and there's people that go to evangelical churches or Baptist churches or who call themselves Christians. But what do they mean by that? It's because they think they might think that God exists. They might even believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but they really don't live their lives to follow Christ at all. Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, I'm uncomfortable using the term Christian for them. Also James 2:19 says the demons believe and shudder. Well, it takes more than just believing some true propositions. It's the demons don't have a love relationship with Christ. It's you gotta believe the true propositions, and the most important thing is love Jesus. And if you don't have that love with your Creator, you're missing the mark. You're missing the objective purpose of life. And those people, there are people who call themselves Christians who I say, well, you're just in the same boat as the demons, right? You believe, but you don't love, and you're not putting Christ first. And anybody that's putting idols in front of Jesus, anybody who loves something else more than Jesus, I'm saying you're either not a Christian or you're not a consistent Christian. And I think Jordan Peterson he's seen way too many people who call themselves Christians but aren't following everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified. And to me, that if Danny would have said either you follow the teachings of Jesus and strive to do so consistently, or you don't, that would be a much more philosophically precise question that's easy for me to think of when I'm doing Monday morning quarterbacking. So
Yeah.
I'll just say that.
Well, and
Danny
especially,
I love Danny, right? But I think he could have done this better. But I also wish, I would just say, if he had that opportunity again, I hope he would handle it differently. Don't get so aggressive. Danny, I think I learned that from you, actually, when you were talking to me about my style with Dr. White, because I got pretty aggressive with him and didn't come off well at all. And so I think it's, I don't know. I just have so much respect for Danny, and he didn't come off well.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where sometimes people, when they have their shot, they want to take it sitting across. Like, he's never going to sit across from Jordan Peterson again. So when he went viral, if that's what his goal was,
right, then he's victorious.
Then he got it. He went viral. Now, I'm sure there will be a lot of people that make fun of him for going viral that way. But, some people say all publicity is good publicity. All right, I want to rewind a little bit back to this young lady, because her and Jordan Peterson have a lengthy conversation about worship. And I don't know how much we'll play here. Jordan's going to offer another definition of Christianity here, specifically, not of God, but of Christianity, that I want to get your take on, Tim. I think it's one that I alluded to before. But there was an interesting conversation about worship, too, because Jordan Peterson was saying, hey, you are either worshiping something that's at the pinnacle, which I would agree. Anything you put at the pinnacle of most importance, you're worshiping. Or you're so fragmented and confused, you're worshiping all sorts of things, and you're fragmented and confused. So I think he was right. I actually agree with this claim that everybody worships something or things. I think you can worship more than one thing. You can put a lot of things, but then you're just conflicted and confused. And I think that might have been the difficulty in the way he worded his proposition or his prompt. So I hope I got it on the right thing here, because Zena does a good job, and she asks him what you wanted him to be asked. Well, what's your definition of Christian?
No, the thing that they want to be incongruent.
Okay.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so if someone can believe in
I would have answered that differently.
He said
Jordan Peterson has some crazy definitions that he just throws out there for everything.
So again, she says, what makes someone a Christian, someone not a Christian? And he says, anybody who's willing to shoulder their cross, that's an execution device. So it's dying to yourself is what it is. Okay. Shoulder your cross and trudge uphill no matter what, right? So then an atheist could be a Christian. On that definition, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because you could die to yourself and trudge uphill and pursue your highest goal no matter what.
Yeah.
So either this isn't really well thought out, or now he later says a different definition that I'm going to try to find it in a little bit. But I wanted to play that part because I think she did a great job. Hey, please help me here. What do you think a Christian is?
Mm-hmm.
Well, his definition isn't very good.
Right.
Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. His definition is not philosophically precise or theologically precise. Probably get closer to my mic here. Yeah, I think she was on the right track. What's her name? Zena. Yeah, good job, Zena. Yeah, again, if you were asking me that question, I would say that a true Christian is somebody who loves Jesus and has dedicated their lives to trying to live according to everything that he said, taught, and exemplified. Yeah, that's where I'd start anyway. What would you add to that, Josh?
Yeah, I think maybe there's could you say that again? Because I'm thinking.
Yeah, a person who has dedicated their lives to living consistently with everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified. That's what Craig Hazen has described as the law of Christ. So, and I say that that's what the Constitution of Heaven is, and everybody who is dedicated to living according to the Constitution of Heaven gets to live in the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and everybody who is opposed to the law of Christ, which ultimately is boiled down to the law of love, is free to live life their own way, separated from love and everybody who has dedicated their lives to the law of love. So, yeah, everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified. So a person who loves Jesus and has dedicated their lives to striving to live consistently with everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified. That's how I define a Christian.
Yeah, I think I would add one thing to the beginning of that, that because there needs to be an element of belief. I think that comes along, and I think what you're thinking is that comes along for the ride. You don't love Jesus without belief in the fact that he lived a perfect life, died, and rose again.
Right. The demons believe and shudder.
Yeah, it's a both and. It's not an either or.
Right. So it's
sort of deal.
It's what one of my professors once differentiated between the James 2:19 belief that the demons have and the John 3:16 belief.
Yeah.
That true Christians have, and with that belief, it's a knowledge, assent, and trust, and I've added to it and love. So it's cat love. Yeah, you got to be a cat lover to be a true Christian. So you got to have knowledge. So, like for instance, with John 14:6, when Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father but through me." Do you possess knowledge of that? That is, do you understand what Jesus is saying there? Then you have, so that's the K, knowledge. The A is assent. Do you assent to that proposition? Do you think it's probably true? Right? If you think it's false, then
yes,
it's not going to work. So you have to think it's at least probably true. You don't even have to say, I know this is true with 100% certainty. All you have to do is say, I think this is probably true. And then, so that's the A. And then you have the T, trust. And that is, do you put your trust in what you know and believe to be true? Have you put your trust in that? And the demons haven't done that. And then finally, it's the love. Do you love Jesus? And the demons definitely don't love Jesus. They hate him. So, yeah, when James says, hey, the demons believe and shudder, he's like, the demons believe. You say you believe? Well, so do the demons. Good for you. What separates you from the demons? And it's the fact that they have, that Christians have dedicated their life. They love Jesus and have dedicated their lives to striving to live according to everything that he said, taught, and exemplified. That's where I'm going with that.
There you go. Awesome. So she actually presses him a little bit on that. Does really good. Again, for time reasons, we can't play all of it because this is a long conversation. And if, like Greg, Zena, if you see this, boy, you would be a fun person to talk to. You very articulate, smart. You want to have a conversation. More importantly, she wants to understand what the other person's saying before she responds. I was very impressed by her. Then she presses him a little bit, and this is his response, I believe, to that press.
Fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that, like, acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as
I
truth.
don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right? And I can found a whole society on that. And that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get this sacrifice and I don't have to. Right? Now, the contrary to that would be something like, you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrifice.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right. So is that person Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
To some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right. So imagine that full Christianity.
Okay, there you go. So that's his definition. I thought I was getting to another spot. I don't know if I got to it. Any reactions to what was said there?
No, I was just enjoying the conversation. I mean, if you have any specific things that she said or Jordan said in mind that you'd like me to respond to, let me know. But nothing just jumping out. Something that you said earlier, I wrote this down during their conversation, as one well-known philosopher once said, "You got to serve somebody."
Yeah.
That is Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan.
Everybody's going to serve somebody. But I don't think that's really what they were talking about there. But I do think, going back to the previous conversation, that's true. Everybody is serving. Everybody's got to serve somebody. Everybody's worshiping something or someone. And I like how you said it might not just be one thing, but it might be things in general that people are worshiping. And they would be worshiping created things, or maybe they're worshiping their favorite philosophy. Maybe they're worshiping that they believe that nihilism is true. And so they're so committed to the proposition that nihilism is true. And so they're living accordingly. They're living according to to a certain proposition. I see all these different things as kinds of worship. And just to get back to what I said earlier, I hold many people, and even I just got back home from working with some well-known college basketball players, some guys who are going to be in the NBA pretty soon. And one of the things that we talked about is people will find themselves worshiping you guys. I did when I was in middle school and even
Michael Jordan, man.
Right. Yeah. I worship Michael Jordan. If somebody told me that I did that back in the day, I said, no, I'm not worshiping him. I look back now, I'm like, I was worshiping Michael Jordan.
You want to be like Mike.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And instead we should want to be like Christ, but it's in human nature to worship. And we do, when we see amazing athletic events, we are drawn to that because it is worthy of praise, just not the highest praise. And so I think Jordan Peterson is on to something there. That's why when we see something amazing happen on the football field or the basketball court, we stand up and cheer. It's worthy of praise, but it's not worthy of worship. I think we often take, because we use the term praise and, hey, it's time for praise and worship at church. But I think they can be two different things. Humans can do things that are worthy of praise, but no human is worthy of worship in the most fundamental sense. And again, anybody that puts something ahead of God is worshiping an idol, if they realize it or not.
Yeah.
So anyway,
That's
that doesn't really have much
All
to
right.
do with what they talked about there, but I wanted to get that.
Yeah. No, and I think, again, he admitted, hey, well, it's a matter of definition. I guess they're doing Christian principles. Well, that's cultural Christianity. We're asking what real Christians are. I think she did a good job of pressing him on that.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to, this is probably the one that most people would assume you would be most interested in. So we need to get to this section. Now there's a shot of Parker here. By the way, this gentleman's name is Parker. And if I ever had an opportunity to have a conversation with him, I wouldn't. I'll just put it that way. I would not enter into a conversation with him. So I'll just he's on TikTok. Apparently he's really popular. I don't understand the appeal. Even if you're on the left, I don't understand the appeal. There are so many better debaters and articulators. I don't know. He's just kind of, anyway. Neither here nor there. All right, let's move on to this. This young man is going to bring up some interesting.
All of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story.
So this is about like the he's going to talk about the like slaughter of the Amalekites and stuff, which is very interesting, and I do want to discuss, but since we're running short on time, I want to get to, I believe, this part here where he's going to talk about free will and God.
Yeah, just quickly, I'll say that I thought this guy actually was the worst out of all of his interlocutors. And without getting into the Canaanite thing and the Amalekite thing, there's so much conversation on that. I'll point people to our website, freethinkingministries.com. I wrote an article, I think it's called 10 Problems with the Canaanite Objection or something like that. And that's a good place to start. Also, I talked about Paul Copan before. I'll reference his book, Is God a Moral Monster? That's a great place to start the conversation. And yeah. So let's go to the free will stuff he's going to say.
Yep, absolutely. So I'd love to have that conversation. We're not ignoring it or because we're afraid of it or whatever. We have those things on our website. I wrote an article called what's it called? Joshua's Conquest and God's Moral Consistency. Also on our website if you want to see what some of our views are. But Paul Copan writes a great book about that as well. So this is, I believe, the part where we're interested in.
A perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral.
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
Our understanding might, but
Okay, how do we distinguish? Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether,
between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself?
Between our
we can only see through our own lenses.
Presumably, a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time is revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Here we go.
Okay. So he's saying a maximally great being doesn't change over time. That's correct. That part's true. But then he said something along the lines.
But I also think it depends on what you mean by change. Because a maximally great being doesn't.
He's perfectly loving, perfectly powerful, perfectly knowledgeable.
His character and his attributes don't change.
Right. He can.
How he interacts with his creation could change.
That's
how he.
change,
yeah. If he knows that. Right now, currently on Earth, it's 3:33, and the next minute will be 3:34, that will change.
Yes.
So his character and his attributes won't change. Sorry, I interjected, but
right. No, you're exactly right, because he's perfectly omniscient. He knows what time it is, and as the hands of the clock tick away, he knows what time it is now, and he knows 30 seconds later, he knows what time it is then. At that current moment. So
and not only here, but also in Korea and Japan.
He knows all the time zones and everything else. So Ryan Mullins has pointed out that God knows all relevant truths, right? So the truth value to all propositions and all the relevant facts, something along those lines. And so the changing of time doesn't count as, oh, God has changed here. No, the time changed and God knew it changed. Anyway, I think his big objection that he starts with here is and he says presumably, I believe, he says, how does he say it? That wouldn't God reveal the complete truth?
Yeah.
Right away, or something along those lines.
Yes.
And you have to remember that an omniscient being who's perfectly intelligent, possesses middle knowledge and counterfactual knowledge, knows what he ought to reveal and what he shouldn't. Think about the maximally great superhero of Doctor Strange and the Avengers. Remember in the movie Infinity War, when Tony Stark says to him, we count this as a prayer, if you will. He talks to Doctor Strange and says, is this the one world where we win? And Doctor Strange says, hey, if I tell you, it won't happen. So he knows there's some things he isn't supposed to reveal at that moment, or else the greatest feasible freedom permitting end game would not occur. So no, it's not the case that he must completely reveal everything all at once. Given his counterfactual knowledge, he knows what he ought to reveal at time A and what he ought to reveal at time B, and so on and so forth. So you've got to, again, it's this man, this young man who is appealing to perfect being theology and being omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent, but then he doesn't factor all of that into the equation when just saying, well, presumably this. Like, well, okay, go back and let's think through everything again.
Well, to use another movie, the great philosophical movie of our time, Bruce Almighty,
that's right.
Showed what the audacity of the human being to assume what a maximally great God should do. So presumably a maximally great being would do this. Why? You have to explain why, presumably, because right now what you're saying is, well, presumably he'd do that because I say he would do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not a good claim. So, sorry, I interrupted you, but yeah, I saw that.
I mean, that's a good question. I've gotten a lot of mileage out of the Avengers movies. I'm just thankful that they were made, but I was practicing systematic theology and analytic philosophy before the Avengers came out.
Yeah.
It's
just nice. Yeah. It's just nice when a popular level movie fits your fits for an
everything I was saying.
Yeah.
The movie came out and lined up with everything that I've been saying in the first place. It just makes it a lot easier to explain it to people now. So.
All right. Should we continue?
Yes.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So
like, for example, are you perfect in attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand.
Not maintain free will.
Okay. Peterson gets into free will there, but he said he could have created us in a way where this would always happen. Not if he gave us libertarian freedom. And you cannot guarantee that. And God could not guarantee that.
It's a conflation with possible with feasible, right?
That's what I was going to say. You got it, dude. Yep. So this young man seems like he understands possible world semantics, but does not understand feasibility, which is a subset of possibilities. So that changes everything. And so he's out of his depth right now, but let's keep going.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
let's not go to that yet.
You threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah,
you said, why wouldn't God? Well,
I just love how incredulous. Look at Dr. Peterson's face here.
All right. He said, if God is omniscient, free will is impossible. Tell me you're not a philosopher without telling me you're not a philosopher.
Well, and it was funny because he goes, well, you brought up free will, and Dr. Peterson was like, well, yeah, because that explains the answer to your question. Mm-hmm. He goes, well, but you can't have free will if there's an omniscient God. So anyway, I'm interrupting.
Wrote an entire book on this subject. And the second edition is 100 pages bigger than this one. So second edition should be out later this year. It's just not true that if God is omniscient, that there's no free will. Knowledge does not stand in causal relation. I point people to different analogies that have been used before to show this. If there's we can put on our philosophical thought experiment hats and say, okay, suppose there was an infallible weather barometer, and you ask the weather barometer what the weather in Spain is going to be a decade from now, and it tells you in 10 years from today it will rain in Spain. Well, you wait around 10 years to see if it's true, and lo and behold, it rains in Spain. Did the weather barometer cause or determine the rain in Spain? Absolutely not. That knowledge is not causal. Knowledge does not stand in causal relation. Moreover, let's suppose that time travel were possible, and you went into the future 10 years from now to see who wins the NBA championship. And who do you want to win in 10 years?
The Bulls. The Bulls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nah, they can't win without Jordan. Anyway,
apparently not.
No. Let's do college football. We go 10 years into the future because we're gonna like this one. We go 10 years into the future to see who wins the college football championship. And what do you know? We see that the Nebraska Cornhuskers win in 2035. Then we come back to 2025. Does your knowledge of what's going to happen in 2035 causally determine what happens in 2035 when the Huskers win the national championship? No, you had nothing to do with their victory. You just gained knowledge of it. So, I mean, we can go much deeper, but long story short, knowledge does not stand in causal relation. Mm-hmm. So just because God knows what you're going to freely do does not mean that you do not freely do it. In my book, and I don't have that book here. In one of my books, well, the second edition of my book, it is, I'll be discussing this too. And I talk that before God creates a world and he possesses middle knowledge, if he knows that Sally would freely do X and freedom permitting circumstance C, if he creates Sally in that circumstance, and then he chooses to create Sally in that circumstance, we go from God knows that Sally would freely choose X to God knows that Sally will freely choose X, but the word freely choose doesn't magically disappear just because would changes to will. So this young man is just flat out wrong when he says that if God's omniscient, we don't have free will. In fact, omniscience is not just compatible with free will, but with the strongest kind of free will known as libertarian freedom.
Yeah, and he's going to make an even further mistake here shortly. So let's keep watching.
You know, it's 1,000 years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you.
And 1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about.
He's acting like in the last 50 years, Graham Oppie has won the day. And that no philosophers are arguing for libertarian freedom. Well, come talk to me. Got a whole book on, right? In fact, I mean, yeah, if we do not have libertarian freedom to exercise thinking and rationality, then he can't possess metaphysical knowledge, which this young man seems to think he possesses quite a bit of. And I got a whole paper on that I co-authored with J.P. Moreland. If you'd like to see it, it's called An Explanation and Defense of the Free Thinking Argument. It's free online. Check it out. But to reference Graham Oppie here, like some trump card to what?
It's a name drop.
Yeah, it's a name drop. But Jordan Peterson said, people have been debating that for 1,000 years, and a lot of philosophers think they've got it figured out. Well, the last 50 years, everything has changed. And Graham Oppie, no. I would say
Peterson could say, okay, well, J.P. Moreland, William Lane Craig. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
If we're just going to name drop.
And I would ask, where in the academic literature has the paper that I co-authored with J.P. Moreland been refuted? Good luck.
There you go. All right. let's keep going with him if you're good with that.
About the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will theodicy fails.
Well, fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you
you
want to
tried to
respond to the
make
argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks the power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Well, it just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, under
Like
your
I said,
view,
if
under
you want
your
to have
view,
it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world,
doesn't mean determined.
it's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it
Causally,
determined.
causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it
Oh,
your
no,
way.
it doesn't. Oh man. Okay.
I
Man.
actually
Who
love.
is this guy?
I think his name is Ian. I
Ian
actually
doesn't know what he's talking about. Jeez.
I actually loved Jordan Peterson's response. Like, I have it your way. You're just gonna say you're just gonna assert something.
Yeah.
Whatever, but that's not what it means.
Yeah. Inevitability does not mean causal determinism. An event is determined. Here's the definition that is usually advanced in academia or something along these lines. An event is determined if antecedent conditions are sufficient to necessitate said event. Okay, so that's what we're working with when we're talking about causal determinism. An event is determined if antecedent conditions are sufficient to necessitate the event. God's knowledge, like we said earlier, knowledge does not stand in causal relation. Therefore, God's knowledge is not sufficient to necessitate the events. Now, God's knowledge will know what will happen, what would happen, and what will happen. But so you could say it's inevitable from God's perspective. He knows what would happen and what will happen, but that doesn't mean he makes it happen. Just because he knows what's going to happen, just like you knew that in 2035 the Nebraska Cornhuskers win the national championship. That doesn't
From
mean
your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, you don't determine it. You don't make it happen. It's not causally determined. So this guy, Ian, if that's his name, isn't aware of the literature. Definitely hasn't interacted with the work that I've collaborated with JP Moreland on. And just really want to encourage him to define your terms. Inevitability does not mean causally determined. He said that. He said, if something's inevitable, it's causally determined. That's what it means. Now, to Jordan Peterson's credit, I've said here in this conversation, you know what? He's not an analytic philosopher or a systematic theologian. He's a psychologist who's trying to think deeply on these things. But when I first heard this morning, I was about ready to, if I had hair, I would have pulled it out when he said, but if it's inevitable, then you don't have free will. And I was like, oh no. I mean, I caught that right away because that's the world in which I live. That's the conversations I have every day. I saw it coming and said, no, that's not true. And I was like, oh no, Jordan Peterson's just going to get steamrolled here. But then Jordan Peterson puts it together and he's not even a philosopher. And he said, well, wait a second, just because something's inevitable doesn't mean it's determined. And I was like, "Lol." I was like, amen, brother, you know? And then Ian says, yes, it does. And like, no, it's just so bad. So anyway, Jordan Peterson was right here, and Ian has some more homework to do.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the next. Are we done with that section? Because they're done with that. This is the next. Oops. This is the next part that I wanted to look at, because look at Peterson's face here. It's unfortunate pause, because now he's going to define Christianity differently. So let's hear this.
Exhaustive.
Yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and he died for your sins, right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand. That's the same claim.
Yeah.
Okay. So should I rewind? Let me rewind a little bit.
My question to you, let me scoot in, would be, what does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that that's a very broad definition of what Christian
Yeah, but it'll
morality
come
is.
in handy at some point in your life.
Right. But I think that many different disciplines and theologies.
Well, you asked for a truncated answer. Eh? I
Right.
mean, there's other ways of representing the
Yeah.
situation, but I wanted to give you something that was kind of foundational briefly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's, exhaustive.
Yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and he died for your sins, right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand. That's the same claim.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think of that?
Yeah, rephrase that. I mean, say it again.
Okay, so his first thing was, the guy asked, well, what does it mean to follow Christian values? And Peterson again reiterates to aim upwards no matter what. And then he says that saying that is the same claim as saying that Jesus Christ is God and died for your sins.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so several things here. I mean, is there an objective upwards or not? Sometimes we call that objective north. I just think it's better to say there's objective moral values and duties here. We have obligations. That's only true if Christianity is true. Well, no, that would be true if Christianity is true, and it's not true if atheism is true. But yeah, what did he say? To aim upward as hard as you can, or something like that.
To aim upwards no matter
what. Again, I think a much better definition is the one that we've already shared here. What does it mean to practice Christian values? It means to follow Jesus. Right now, the Jewish religion does not follow Jesus, but we share so much of the same foundation that we usually get along quite nicely, and we can do culture and society well together. Mormonism, we would say the same thing. They don't know the true Jesus, but they follow his commands. They try to follow his commands because they have to do all they can do so that they can get grace. So there's a lot of pressure here. They actually live, I think, a lot of times better than you and I might at times, because they've got this pressure. They've got to, some would call it working their way to heaven. But I would say, how did the interlocutor phrase it? What does it mean to practice Christian values?
Yeah.
Something along those lines. I would just say, hey, it means to devote your life to Christ and to live consistently. To use Jordan Peterson's words, as hard as you can, to live consistently with everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified. That's what it means to follow Christ, and that's what separates us from Judaism. And it's what separates the New Testament from the Old Testament. A lot of people here brought up things that they didn't like what the Old Testament said, things like that. I'm like, do you have a problem with the law of Christ? Everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified. What did he teach? What and how we ought to think, or how we ought to live, how we ought to treat each other? Are you opposed to? And that's what sets Christianity apart from everything else.
That's good. I think that's about it for the clips that we'll do this time. I'd like to add one more thing. If you watch the video that I do about what Jordan Peterson believes, I think this answer helps you understand why I call at least what he believes right now, at least what he's articulated publicly. I'll say that. I call it Jungian Arianism. That's what I call it. So it's very psychological, but it sees Jesus as an archetype to get to God rather than as the God man who made a way through his life, death, and resurrection for God to bring us into the family. So like Arius believed that Jesus was a created being through whom God created all other beings. And so there were two things that the Nicene Creed did. It made sure that it was Jesus begotten, not made. And then the second thing is that Jesus came down, that God came down to us so that he could bring us up, not so that he could show us the way to achieve an upward aim for ourselves, but so that he would bring us up through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so that's why I call it Jungian Arianism. So if you want to see more on that, check out the video or the article that I linked below. We've been going for about 2 hours now. It's been good. I think we've been able to definitely rehash some of this. There's a lot of videos out there if you want to see other aspects of this conversation, but these are the things that we wanted to highlight. And we made it the entire way without YouTube kicking us off. So, yay. All right.
Hey, and I just want to say, I doubt Jordan Peterson will see this. Be awesome if he does. But Josh and I, we're rooting for you and we're cheering you on. And Josh and I went and actually listened to Jordan Peterson speak in Omaha not too long ago. And I am thoroughly enjoying the impact that Jordan Peterson is having on our culture. It's a positive impact. And I just enjoy watching this journey that he's on. And hey, I even bought his shirt. Clean your room, tell the truth.
Yes.
Yeah. I really respect Jordan Peterson, and I think he's going in the right direction. So,
absolutely, and that tell the truth thing came up in this thing too, because someone said, if someone had a gun to my head, I'd lie and say that the pen wasn't here.
Yeah, but, okay, yeah. So really quickly, because that's one thing that I remember that I did want to say. This won't take long. I would lie to save life, because that is the most loving thing to do in that situation. So that gets us back to the law of love, the law of Christ. That God created us on purpose and for the specific purpose to love each person as ourselves, and to love God first, and to everybody love everybody. So that's why I say arguably that a perfectly good police officer would carry a gun and only use it if it's the most loving thing to do in that in that extreme situation. You would only pull the trigger if it's the most loving thing to do in that crazy situation. Similarly, you would only lie if it really is the most loving thing to do in that situation. And so that is consistent with Christian values. It is never lie. You should never lie unless it is the most loving thing to do in a certain situation.
Yeah, I agree. And I did not like Jordan Peterson's response there. He was responding to a gotcha. I think he could have easily not wiggled his way out of it, responded in the way that you did, to say, well, yeah, there's clearly a hierarchy of values. He's all about hierarchy, right? So there's clearly a hierarchy of values of when you should tell the truth and when a lie might be necessary. So I think he answered that one a little bit poorly. So,
and we do have a biblical example of Rahab here, who deceived those going after those that she was hiding, and she's praised. She's in the hall of faith, right, in Hebrews. So we do have a biblical example of that. So anyway,
yes, absolutely. Thank you, Alg77. I don't know. Is it Alg or AI? I don't know. Is that an L or is that an L or an I? Let us know.
It looks like an L. Alg.
I don't know. All right. It's been great. It's been fun. I do wish you would have answered that one a little bit better. I think you could easily answer that one and get out of it without it being a gotcha. Because he said something like, well, I would have had to make so many mistakes to be in that situation. And I'm like, hey,
that's irrelevant.
That's irrelevant. And that you're kind of saying that people who did that in World War II made mistakes.
Right.
To get in that situation.
It's their fault the Holocaust is going on.
Yeah. Well, and it's certainly like, well, sure, I could just refuse to hide the Jews. Then I wouldn't be in that situation. but that's not moral either. So
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
anyway, all right, here's a question as we close here at the 2-hour mark. Will Free Thinking Ministries ever start a Discord? It's the best platform for me to have a pop-up notification for your updates, yet not toxic like other platforms. We will consider it. We haven't considered it yet, but I've seen other places doing the Discord thing. The ironic thing is I'll probably have to ask my 13, almost 14-year-old son, okay, how do I do this best? Because I'm old. So anyway, not as old as you, but I'm old.
No, not close.
All right, if you like this video, make sure you like it, share it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Make sure you get the word out there. If you want to be a part of the team, we can only do this. Hey, this video was not monetized today. So if you want to just drop a few in to continue the forward march of Free Thinking Ministries, you can go to freethinkingministries.com/donate, and you can join the team. By doing that, you'll receive a newsletter. If you do that and add into the contact information as well. So please do that. We'd really appreciate your support. And anything else you want to add, Tim, before we head off here?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, God bless. And as we always say here, Free Thinking Ministries,
Stay reasonable.
stay reasonable.
Horrible.